Good afternoon, good evening, everybody, for another session in Outrights Out Summit 2020. Virtual this time, but I'm so thrilled that we could do it in this way, and I have another fantastic panel here talking about legal progress, advancing LGBTIQ equality throughout the globe. My panelists today are Her Excellency Ana Helena Chacon Echeverria, the Ambassador of Costa Rica and Spain. I have Randy Boissonneau from Canada, entrepreneur, former member of parliament, and former special advisor on LGBT two-spirit issues for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. You see, I'm already blushing just saying his name. So we have Alexa Hoffman here, very fierce and courageous activist from Barbados. Alexa is the founding director of the Barbados Trans Advocacy and Agitation Collective, and also the chair of UC Trans, a new regional network of trans people and organizations in the Caribbean. Last but not least, I have with me Hamada, the executive director of Shades of Ebony from Sudan, a country that we don't hear a lot from, but like things are happening there. So Hamada will tell us a lot about that. With this panel, we have a couple of things some housekeeping rules. You are all free to ask questions, but please put them in the chat. I will pick them up from the chat as much as I can. But of course, we only have 60 minutes, so I'm not sure if we can do all the questions that are there. There's one exception because Her Excellency, Ms. Chacon, has to leave a little bit early. So, I will have 2 or 3 questions, given the time, for her right after her presentation. So if you have questions for Ms. Chacon, please ask them as soon as she starts talking. Then we can tackle those questions. For the rest, I'm looking forward to this fantastic panel, and I won't take more of your time because it's important that we hear from you. As we know, 2020 has been a very strange year, a very dark year in many, many ways. But we also have things to celebrate, especially in legal progress for LGBTIQ people. And therefore, we're going to look at the introduction of same-sex marriage in Costa Rica, an exciting process, and hopefully with more spin-offs and successes for the region. We're also going to look at the success that Canada is banning SOGI change efforts, or conversion therapy as it's more popularly known. So Mr. Boissonneau is going to tell us all about that and the process, and hopefully more countries will follow. But we also have unfinished business, and the case in Barbados on the anti-discrimination bill in employment is one of such an example, where there's a lot of good things in the bill, but for instance, gender expression and identity was not listed as a ground for discrimination. And then a big part of unfinished business, Sudan. Sudan was until recently a country where LGBTIQ people could have the death penalty. Things are changing, and lots of things are changing. And Hamada is going to tell us what is happening there and what the activists are planning. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Chacon, to tell us about same-sex marriage in Costa Rica. Ms. Chacon, please.
Well, thank you very much. For me, it's a big honor to be with all you this night. I will tell you a little bit of the history of Costa Rica. When I was a congresswoman in 2006 to 2010, I was trying, to really embrace human rights. And part of embracing human rights is giving same-sex couples the right to get married, the right to adoption and everything. But nothing was going on in the Congress because it was quite divided. Then when I became vice president of Costa Rica, I did a simple question to the International American Court. It was a question that in the convention that we signed up saying that we respect human rights, the rights of the couples are protected, and the rights of trans people also, if they are protected by the states, because we were living terrible years. I know Costa Rica is a very respectful country for human rights, but for some, not for everybody. So during those years, there were poverty, especially for trans people. There was no assurance for housing or fooding. And the only reason for many of these lacks of rights was being part of the LGBTIQ plus community, and that wasn't fair. So I really try to ask the Inter-American Court what will be into the convention. If we sign the conventions in the whole world, it's because we want to respect what we did and what we really signed over there. And so they said that yes, it was a right for all the couples, same-sex couples, to get married. Not civil union, it's just marriage. That's the right they have. And for trans people, it was the right to change their name as how they really feel like it. They don't have to go with a medical thing that's saying that they are okay or not. It's just they will to change their name. So things were going really, really fast and make history in Costa Rica because there was an after and a before when they say this. I think it was a day of light. I thought that day that dignity really had another significance. It was really, really important that discrimination couldn't go on more in Costa Rica. And although in all the regions, all the countries that were in the region, in the inter-American system, there was no more discrimination, structural discrimination, stigmatization, and other forms of violence, because there is a lot of pain in many lives when they don't have the same rights. And I really think that good politicians should bring happiness to the people. It's not pain. And that was very, very important for me. This also said that we really reivindicate all the rights. And also, it's very important to say that love is a human condition. Love is the recognition for protection from the nation, from the state. And we don't need any more stigmas, any more violence, any more discriminations, or any more, showing off, this is what and this is that. And I think that the love is very, very, very important feeling, because it's a great feeling. I don't know any public policies that has been built in hate. That's a good public policies. So in Costa Rica, now we have same-sex marriage. It wasn't easy. It was terrible for some days. It was terrible, especially for me, for my daughters, for my family, because you have all kind of stigma all around you, but I don't care. I didn't care because I knew that a baby that was being born in Costa Rica that day, 15 years afterwards, he will feel right if he really feels like a gay man or a trans girl or whatever he wants or she or it be. So it's very important for me, to assure that human rights in Costa Rica. So that was the resolution in the court. And I think this is a very important reivindication. I know that we have a lot of things to fight for: the pandemic, poverty, also discrimination in other, in other collective peoples. Like, for example, I'm a mother of a disabled woman, and I know there's a lot of discrimination still, but we are working for it. But if you want to have good democracy, if we want to have a strong democracy, you can't be indifferent for the pain, for the hunger, for the exclusion, for inequality. So that's very important for us. And I think that there has been other resolutions in the area, in America, and there should be more. But every country has to go their own, their own rhythm. I know that it has to go through the governments or the Congress. But now we have a very, very strong statement to demand, again, the Inter-American Court, and said, this resolution, OC24 is the name of the resolution. You should appeal to that resolution, and we want same-sex marriage, and we want gender identity to to be legal and right in our countries. To make a long story, this is the shortest story, and we have a happy ending because now we have more than 400 couples that have been married in Costa Rica since May to now 19th, in 19th and then this May, because it took a long time to do it. And we have more to come, and we have a lot of people that change their ID, and now they're going into schools, into university, into high schools with more dignity for trans population also.
It's such a beautiful story and a good story, and there's a question. I will come to that, but my immediate question is, after this resolution, and you being one of the persons like asking the courts very innocently, like how does it work? Are you being invited to all the neighboring countries to come and tell how to do it? What's the response of other countries that are bound by this resolution?
Well, not really. You know, this is the first time a vice president of a nation signed up a question for the court. Never before. And I did it as vice president, but by myself. So everything was going through me, but I had a lot of people that support this, and you know, everybody, some of this they were very happy, and others were saying, well, the family sent it in Costa Rica and everything, you know, all the things that you have pro and against. No, not really all the countries invite me. I think that we have some people that very religious in the area, and they think this is wrong. But the wonderful thing that's going on, and here in Spain it happens the same, it happens 15 years ago, not this year like in Costa Rica, and nothing has happened. You know, couples are getting married. my first marriage, my first wedding here of same-sex marriage was two friends of mine. One is from Costa Rica and the other from Spain, and I couldn't stop crying. You know, I was so excited, and I will be also, I'll be going to Costa Rica this December, and I'll be going to the first wedding over there. But no, but they ask a lot, and I think there is a very important part in this, and that is civil society. You know, I admire them a lot. They are brave, and they have been putting this into the public policies. You don't find a politician that says that this is a sexy thing. And I didn't do it because it was sexy or not sexy. I just did it because I believe in that. I got married, and my marriage was horrible. You know, but nobody provided me that. Nobody said, no, you can't do it. I think that if you want to do it, you have to do it, and you have to have the protection of the law for getting married and for dissolving that marriage also. It's our right when you are a citizen, when you are older from 18 years, because, you know, I don't approve early marriage. I've been also ruling a lot about early marriage in Costa Rica, and I prohibited that you can't get married. I think that you must be 40 years, 50 years, sometimes you are such a mature person. But I mean, it's very important, and it's very important for the patrimonial also division. And it's a step. We have to go forward. I mean, we need to do a lot of things in the region. Not everybody is equal, but Chile has advances. In Mexico, there's advances. In Ecuador, you know, so there are some countries that are going on with this.
Randy, you had a question as well in the chat. Maybe I can give you the floor.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, and Excellency, fantastic. And you made me tears to my eyes. When I'm adopted, when I came out to my parents, I told them that they had adopted a gay baby. So your reference is perfect. You were a legislator and you were vice president. So the courts have led, and they led in Canada as well. But what is the role of parliaments and national assemblies in your region of the world and around the world to make sure that we're advancing LGBTQ2 rights, and even this case of equal marriage, enshrining it in law?
Well, I don't think they are doing, advances in this, because I think that you have to rule with the Constitution and the human rights. You can't go into politics and rule by your religious dogma. It's very difficult to do that. I really respect your belief that for you, for your own house, but not for everybody. But now in Latin America, we have a mix of Congress that really try to impose what they believe as the religion. And I am against that. I always have been against that because Costa Rica, we are Catholic by constitution. And I mean, that if you want, I've been always fighting to be a laic country, laico, but I haven't been successful in that. It's not to go against any religion. It's just, I think that the democracy, it's really more and more powerful if everybody has the same stage, even though if they are Catholic or Jewish or whatever they are. But in Latin America now, there is a mix of religions and politicians that's not going very well in the Congress, in all the different Congress, in the whole Latin America.
Great. Thank you so much. And I know your time is very limited, Your Excellency. I know you have to jump off to go to another ceremony. And just thank you so much for being with us, doing this presentation. It was really great hearing you, and hope we can continue this conversation one day, because I want to learn and hear much more from you. So thank you for being with us, and well, hope to greet you one other time. And well, thank you again.
Thank you. I just want to embrace everybody, wish you well, and say, please go and check out what the Inter-American Court says, because it will be very helpful for other countries, even though they are not in the Inter-American system. And have a happy holidays.
Thank you so much. You too. Bye. That brings me to our second panelist, Randy Boissonneau from Canada. Like, Canada is becoming one of the front runners in banning SOGI change efforts, or as it's more popular known, conversion therapy. So, Randy, maybe you can update us and tell us about the process that happened in Canada to come to this very important piece of legislation that might serve as an inspiration and also as an example for other countries who are contemplating the same. Randy.
Sure, Paul. Thanks very much, and thanks for your role in this panel. And it's great to be on a panel with such esteemed activists and parliamentarians. I want to thank the Out Summit organizers. I want to thank Outright Action International, you, Jessica, the whole team, for putting this together. Your work around the world is essential and even more critical during this global pandemic. I also think that it's really important to share an anecdote. When I was a member of Parliament, one of the accidents of legislation or intentional elements of legislation in Alberta is that you get to, as a member of Parliament, preside over marriage ceremonies. And I've done now 3 marriages, and I can only do 3 a year, that were same-sex marriages, and one was even 2 gender non-binary people who got married. And just the joy and the sheer sense of accomplishment that they were able to get married is a big deal for them, and obviously it's part of our advances here in Canada. But look, we have a lot of work to do, and I think I want to set this in some quick context. When I was appointed as Justin Trudeau's special advisor on LGBTQ2 issues, there was a lot of work that still had to be done. And for about 50 years, going right up until the 1990s, the government of Canada systematically persecuted, identified, fired, humiliated LGBT people in our armed forces, in our federal public service, and in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And it was very difficult for the government of Canada to have conversations with LGBTQ2 organizations because of that long history of discrimination and persecution. And so my primary task was to get the Prime Minister ready to make an apology on behalf of the government of Canada, which he did November 27th, 2017, and it was broadly accepted and by the LGBTQ community across the country. And that is what's allowed us since that time to be able to build bridges, to get $20 million of domestic funding for LGBT organizations, and to create the Canada Fund, which is $30 million over the next 5 years and $10 million a year ongoing to support LGBTQ2 organizations around the world. How does that connect to conversion therapy? Well, one of the things that Prime Minister Trudeau said on that November 27th apology in the House of Commons was never again. And we will do better, and we will have your backs. And so having people's backs is making sure that conversion therapy can't take place in this country. And I have to say that it has been the leadership of small municipalities and large municipalities across the country here in Alberta. In 2018, Vancouver was the first municipality, one of our top 3 cities, to pass legislation to ban conversion therapy in their municipality. And then in 2019, something very interesting happened. A small community to the north of where I grew up, it's known as St. Albert, maybe 50, 60,000 people put a motion on the city council to ban conversion therapy. Very quickly after that, Edmonton followed suit. So did another community to the east, Sherwood Park. We have small communities, 10,000 people and less, rural communities, and what is otherwise known as a very conservative province, stepping up and saying, we don't want our citizens to be harmed. Whether we have 5 LGBT people or 500 or 5,000 or 50,000, this shouldn't happen to them. And so civil society has been incredibly active in this. We have researchers, we have advocates, we have organizations across the country getting involved in this. And I just want to say that one of the important elements of the municipal legislation is that it applies to both minors and to adults. And that is very avant-garde around the world to make sure that if you are a business or an organization that's trying to do this to kids or to adults, that you will have your business license revoked, you can be fined, and there are severe consequences at the municipal level. Now let's take a look at the provincial level, because as many people who study Canada or know about us know, we have a federal system. So we have a federal government, we have provincial governments, and we have municipal governments. And that means that there are certain things that are in the responsibility and literally in the province, in the jurisdiction of the provinces. And that includes education and health. And so you can imagine that when it comes to preventing the nefarious practices of conversion therapy, we have to have the provinces on board. And so right now in 2020, I have to say, and this is from a report that I've included in the links that was launched in October of 2020, only the provinces of Ontario, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island right now have legislation that prevent this practice. It is right now in front of the legislatures in New Brunswick and in Yukon Territory, and the National Assembly of Quebec is also looking at it. And what's interesting about the legislation at the National Assembly of Quebec is that it will prohibit conversion therapy for both adults and minors. And that would be some of the most progressive legislation in the country against conversion therapy. And so that's very important. So let's turn to the federal government. The federal government earlier this year tabled a piece of legislation known as Bill C6. And the official title, it's quite boring, but here's what it is. It's an act to amend the criminal code, bracket conversion therapy. And here's what it says. And I put a link to this in the chat as well. This enactment amends the criminal code to, among other things, create the following offenses: causing a person to undergo conversion therapy against the person's will, causing a child to undergo conversion therapy, doing anything for the purpose of removing a child from Canada with the intention that the child undergo conversion therapy outside Canada, advertising an offer to provide conversion therapy, and receiving a financial or other material benefit from the provision of conversion therapy. And it provides jail time from between 2 years and 5 years, plus monetary penalties for these offenses. Now, it's important that you understand what the Government of Canada, and I say this now because if you tune in to the House of Commons proceedings at the Justice Committee, you can actually listen to the committee members and the battle that's going on right now. Because we have religious groups that want to shut this down. They want to cut the protections of trans people right out. And they say, oh, just add the word coercive and then we'll be fine with the legislation. Because then it gives them a whole bunch of argument to say, well, we're just talking to somebody about their faith. We're not really trying to change them. And I have to say that I'm dismayed and disgusted by the fact that in 2020, we still have people that think there's something wrong with a person who's LGBTQ2IS, and that has to stop. I'm 50 years old, I'm openly gay, and quite frankly, I'm beautiful and awesome as I am, and I don't need to be changed. And nobody who's LGBTQ2I+ needs to be changed, and everybody should just back off. And I will say that in Canada, I will say that anywhere in the world, because you are all fabulous as you are. And whatever Canada can do to help you pass legislation in your country to change this, let me know, because we want to help. Our ministers want to help. Our government wants to help. Okay, that was an editorial, Paul. Over to the definition of conversion therapy in the actual legislation. It says conversion therapy means a practice, treatment, or service designed to change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual or gender identity to cisgender, or to repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior. For greater certainty, this definition does not include a practice, treatment, or service that relates to a person's gender transition or to a person's exploration of their identity or to its development. Now, civil society thinks we're not going far enough as a government. I'm not in government anymore. I didn't win the 2019 election, so I'm now a private citizen. So I can say things that some other people might not say. I'm very proud that Minister Lametti and Minister Chagger have put this legislation in front of the House. I understand that some civil society people in Canada will say that it doesn't go far enough. In Canada, as the legal scholars on this Zoom, on this hop-in will know, we have the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And so there is a natural tension and a natural concern in the Justice Department that if we go too far with this legislation, that religious groups would have an argument in the Charter that protects religious freedoms, and then it would obviate this law protecting people from conversion therapy. So rights have to abut next to each other. They have to confront and they have to coexist. And this is one of those examples of the coexistence of human rights and the protection of the person butting right up against religious rights. And I do say that civil society has a reason to be concerned. I mean, the federal government and the related education and training as it pertains to protecting people from hate speech has not been stellar. And so if you can see the whole value chain, so this law, let's say this law gets passed, then there has to be education, there has to be training. Where's the budget for that? Where's the money that's going to come from the federal government to make sure that police officers, that judges, that lawyers are trained and ready to go? It's an open question and it needs to be debated. And this is legislation that is important for Canada. It will criminalize all of these behaviors. And when you add the federal piece to the provincial piece to the municipal piece, we're taking steps that are really important for the protection of Canadians. And I think I'll pause there and look for any questions.
Thank you so much, Randy, for that. And now unfinished business is the implementation, to make sure that people understand the bill and are working to what the bill intends to do. So that's the piece that is still missing and that you are working hard on with lots of colleagues to make that happen. I don't see any questions in the chat at the moment. There might be questions coming up. So if it's okay for you, I will have the bridge to some other important unfinished business in Barbados. Alexa, like we know, we heard a little bit about the employment bill, or the Prevention of Discrimination in Employment Circles bill, how it passed in Barbados this year, but gender expression and identity was deliberately excluded from the bill.
That is correct.
A big piece of unfinished business, and we would love to hear your perspective on what happened and what can be done to correct this and make the unfinished business true business. Alexa.
Okay, well, to give some background on the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Bill 2020, or what is now the Employment Prevention of Discrimination Act, because it has gone through both the House of Assembly and the Senate, and it passed in both houses. When the current administration, the Mia Mottley-led administration, came into office in 2018, about a year after, a Joint Select Committee, as it's more informally called, it's actually called a Social Justice Partnership, more formally, where government held consultations, literally a consultative board with civil society advocates. So, and these advocates came from various sectors of society. So the LGBTIQ community, the differently abled community, the Rastafarian community, religious communities, any minority or any sect generally, but more focusing on minority groups. They were supposed to meet, I think, about monthly. Yeah, they were supposed to meet monthly, have meetings on various subjects, and quarterly a report would be issued outlining what discussions were had, what observations were made. Regretfully, I have yet to see a single report coming out from this Joint Select Committee. I don't recall seeing it published in the papers. I have looked through, official Gazette publications, haven't really seen anything. Maybe, it's formatted in a way that I am not seeing it, or maybe I'm not looking hard enough, but I have not seen any such reports to be able to tell, what discussions have been had. However, I don't want to say the government, but our legislature has been coming forward with various movements, from decriminalizing carrying certain quantities of marijuana, um, allowing it for sacramental use, to putting provisions in place where we have something called a welcome stamp initiative. This is where people who work in foreign-based companies can actually relocate to Barbados while still working for that overseas company, and they can, live and operate from here amongst the rest of us. When that initiative first came out, it was only encompassing heterosexual couples and their families. There was some international outcry, what if, an LGBTI couple wanted to come and live here in Barbados, because we do have LGBTQ tourists who come, they may wish to come here and set up a home, set up a business, whatever the case is, and the necessary changes were made. Then the Employment Prevention and Discrimination Bill came around. Now, navigating through civil society, there was talk, but up until this bill came to be discussed in the House of Assembly, I had yet to actually see this document. I had even gone on the Parliament's website looking for this thing and couldn't find it. Turned out, even though it was on the website, it was not directly linked. You had to know how to navigate to it in order to see it. So that was the first warning flag. Second, well, that's really the second warning flag. The first warning flag, which I alluded to, was that even though there were these joint select committee meetings, there was no public update being given. So many of us in Barbados were kind of lost and were caught by surprise when this bill came up. And when I looked through the bill, and I actually have a downloaded copy on my system, it lists a whole slew of protected categories from discrimination. However, it turned out to be, I'm actually here double multitasking. I'm not going to try to look for that now. My head is kind of full. But there was about roughly, it went from A through H or something like that. And it included sexual orientation, but gender identity and expression were not included. And I found that I couldn't even give the benefit of the doubt and say, oh, it was an honest mistake, because I'm looking at the document and I'm seeing it's even including things such as religious attire, religious appearance, and so on. And it's going through the entire list of categories. I'm actually here now opening it so that I can refer to the list properly. And for some reason, my system does not wish to cooperate and let me see it. Here we go. Okay, so just bear with me while I look for the correct list. But, going through this whole thing, and then I immediately, sounded the alarm. I'm like, hey, why isn't gender identity and expression included? And for me personally, I have a horse in the race, because I'm currently undergoing litigation against my former employer. I used to work as a legal assistant up until October of 2018, when, after I legally changed my name and presented my employer with the paperwork, I was more or less asked to stay home from work for an extended period of time. And then when I realized, what, this is unreasonable, and I called it out and confronted my boss, I was simply told, you've reached the end of the line, don't come back to this office. So I had to get the Labor Department involved. At that time, we were governed, and still are governed in part, by the Employment Rights Act, which covers situations exactly like what I went through, where you're basically put on short time, as it's called. And the Labor Department tried to mediate the situation. It didn't work, so they've had to refer the matter to the Employment Rights Tribunal for adjudication. And, I have been fairly public in, civil society circles about it. Up to, we had a global decriminalization conference in July of last year, and I publicly spoke about that. So to find that, a year later, this bill comes up, and it seems no consideration was given by whoever was sitting on the Social Justice Partnership representing LGBTI people. They didn't give any consideration to this. It was very bothersome. And I had a number of people who told me, oh, we can always wait for an amendment. I said, but no, that's unreasonable, because the Employment Rights Act was passed in 2012. It's taken 8 years for this prevention of discrimination bill to come up, which was really trying to plug gaps that the ERA left. And even senators had made the same observation. They said, why are we spending all this effort to draft an entire bill, when really we could have just had these discussions as amendments to the standing law, which could have gone a lot easier. So I've actually found the list of grounds of protection from discrimination, and it goes as follows. The grounds that are protected are race, origin, political affiliation, trade union affiliation, color, creed, sex, sexual orientation, social status, marital status, domestic partnership status, pregnancy, maternity, family responsibility, medical condition, disability, age, physical feature, and I quote, any characteristic which appertains generally or is generally imputed to a person on the basis of any ground referred to in paragraphs A through R. So it's a fairly comprehensive list. The fact that gender identity and expression were left off, but yet references made to sexual orientation, and they even go as far as to differentiate marital status versus domestic partnership status. So they're acknowledging that even if you're in a relationship but not married, you're to be protected. They've, put considerable effort into diversity, but have fallen miserably short on transgender people. And even amidst the debates, there was one member of parliament who had made reference to my specific case without mentioning me by name or the precise details. He said, I find it, what did he say? He said, we're aware of a situation where there's someone who was discriminated on the basis of their, as he put it, sexual identity, that they had a particular sexual identity. And so they wound up being terminated from their job for it. And I thought that even then, at that moment, there would have been cause for someone else to get up and say, hey, this is being mentioned, but nowhere in this bill, is such a situation being prevented from happening again. And to make matters worse, this bill was very hastily rushed through the House of Assembly. The very next week, it landed on the tables of the Senate, and that too was rushed through. And what I found particularly disturbing was one senator, even though she was lauding the efforts of the bill in preventing discrimination and saying, there's a cost to discrimination, she then went on to this whole rant about there being a leftist ideology. And there was this leftist ideology that wanted to go against what she called hermetically sealed principles. And she went into a whole diatribe that gender is not assigned. And, she even went as far as to say, what was it? An apple tree cannot bear mangoes or some other nonsense. But it was very ridiculous. And I'm just there sitting with the radio on, and I'm typing as quickly as I can to transcribe everything, because I'm here saying, people need to know about what's happening here. So the bill passed, and I immediately started hunting for heads, because how was it that this thing went right past myself? It went past pretty much, as far as I knew, or as far as I, was aware, it went past everybody else in LGBTI circles, and there was hardly a murmur about it. And then I was made to understand, but, the government did consult with LGBTI groups, and we did have a representative for the trans community, and they tried to lobby for gender identity and expression to be included, but it wasn't taken on. And I immediately went off and said, and what have you said about that? That they've consulted with you, they've listened to you and ignored you.
But Alexa, do you think there's a chance that it can be amended, repaired? Because
I genuinely don't feel confident about that, because like I said, the ERA came up 8 years ago, and it has taken 8 years to get to this point. Who knows how much longer it may take to get to that amendment? And I am vehemently opposed to saying, well, let's wait for an amendment, because not only am I left still vulnerable to being discriminated against, not only while I'm in my job, but even while I apply for work, because the EPDB was meant to also protect people in the recruitment process, whereas the ERA only protected you 1 year after you were hired. So between your first day of work and the 29th day of the 11th month, your boss can decide for any arbitrary reason you're fired. And you can take the matter to the Labor Department and they will write back and tell you, unfortunately, you have not met that 52-week requirement under the ERA. And so you have no case. It's unfortunate, but, you know, tough cheese. Here, the EPDB was trying to fix that and it's failed. So that means now trans people are left vulnerable to employment discrimination. Any other member of the LGBTI community who cannot satisfy whatever Parliament or whoever is interpreting the bill may consider as it relates to sexual orientation, because it's gender identity, gender expression. You also have intersex people, you know, all these other stages under the spectrum are coming in. These people can also remain vulnerable, and to expect us to even wait 1 year before an amendment is considered is totally unreasonable, especially when you consider how everything has been turned upside down by this pandemic. So it's a really egregious problem.
Thanks so much for sharing that with us, Alexa. It is really concerning and quite horrible. Attendees, if you have questions for Alexa, and please put them in the chat. I hope we have some minutes left at the end to ask the questions. There's another guest with us who I would like to give the floor to, because so many changes and big changes are happening in their country. Sudan was until recently one of the countries that had death penalty for LGBTIQ people on the books. There was a regime change and things are changing. Hamada, I'm so thrilled that you're with us. Can you share with us what's happening in Sudan and what you are planning to advance LGBTIQ equality in a country in such a crucial and historical time as we have now? Hamada, please.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, everyone. Actually, it's been very interesting to listen to all the speakers at the panel and see what are the similarities regardless of the differences in context and the differences even geographically and culturally. But there's always a very similar kind of approach toward LGBTQI+ rights, especially on a policy level or on a legal and legislative level. As you mentioned, there had been a political change in Sudan. Sudan had been going through a revolution since 2018, and it succeeded to overthrow the previous regime in 2019. And since then, we've been trying to, and even before that, during the revolution, we've been trying to observe carefully what is the situation, our participation as citizens, and how to ensure that as we are participating in this demand for change, demand for democracy, we will be recognized by the successing government, the democracy that we are hoping for. And we also made sure as activists and as organizations to have all the tools and all the mechanisms to address our issues when the opportunities opens, which is currently during the transitional period of the Sudanese government, and even afterward, based on how elections might go when it comes to that. And one of the things that I've been picking up on by Randy and by Helena when they were talking is the importance of political will. And this is what makes all the difference, because the current government had been showing a great political will on adapting the universal human rights concept. And also they've been implementing it into some extent regarding the policy changes and the reforms within the criminal law in Sudan. And like the change happened when there had been some amendments to the criminal law, especially laws that described as limiting human rights or even going against human rights. And one of those laws were Article 148, which is the Sodomy Act in the Sudanese criminal law, which was like punishing same-sex relationships by through 3 levels, either flogging or lashing, and imprisonment plus fining, and also death penalty through like different states. So like if you were caught the first time, you'll be either flogged and jailed, and if you were caught the second time, it's the same penalty, and then for the third time it will be death penalty. And like this was one of the laws. There's other laws also can be used to target LGBTQI plus individuals, especially gender non-conforming individuals, and they were created directly towards women, but we always analyze it as women as a gender, so anything that can come across by the society standards as representing womanhood or womenness as a gender. So this was also targeting trans women and gender non-conforming queer people in general. So all of those laws were affected, which was a very important move, a very important step by the government, and which shows that this government is actually willing to consider those kind of standards, those human rights standards. But then when we look to the Sodomy Act, the death penalty was removed, the flogging was removed from all over the criminal acts or criminal laws in general. But then the imprisonment was added in number. So it was previously it was for no longer than 5 years, and now it became 7 years. And somehow by you making this kind of amendment, you are directly or indirectly recognizing and reminding everyone that same-sex relationships are considered a crime, and for that it's going to be punished by this amount of years in prison. And this is where the disappointment came from. But we were also very aware, because the transitional government is going through a huge attack from the previous regime followers, the Islamists, who are claiming that this government is immoral. And this is something that we've been hearing a lot throughout this panel, this kind of dynamics between understanding and adapting human rights and between what's perceived as the religious moral compass kind of thing. And but for us as an activist, we were trying to make sure that we are not only observing and documenting all those kind of changes, but we are also interacting. As I mentioned, this government had been showing the willingness to have this adaptation and understanding of universal human rights. And I think it's our job to push this government to assure that they remember that LGBTQI plus rights are part of human rights. And you can never claim that you are willing to implement this, but you will not recognize us, or you will push us to a side, or as we've been hearing a lot, like this is not the right time for it. We are already under attack. We need to assimilate to the general public and make sure that they understand it, and then we can take steps forward, which is unacceptable in any means, because this society is it is a group of individuals, and those individuals includes LGBTQI plus community. So how you gonna go and take the step and say like this is not a priority because there is serious issues in the community, but you are erasing a whole part of the community, and it's not a small number. We are currently trying to use all tools possible for advocacy, whether on a local or national or regional and even international level, to communicate whether with the government, with the policymakers, and with the legislators, because also we've been seeing in a lot of constitutions that you hear great things about like human rights and how to accept them and how to fight discrimination and stigma, but then there is no legislation to implement that on the ground. So we need to make sure that it's not only decriminalized. We are not talking about death penalty. A lot of people say, great, it is very great that it's no longer punished by death penalty, but it should not be a crime in the first place. And there should be policies, laws, and legislations to ensure the protection and the safety of LGBTQI plus individuals, as they are citizens of this country, of this state, and they should be protected by the state and by the government. So yeah, I think also one of the important things that had been mentioned is the what is the international role? Because it's something that Randy was talking about, like Canada, and how do they see their role in an international platform. And we also recognize that this government is trying so hard to reestablish the relationships with the global community, because we've been isolated for 30 years. We've been, and still, but gradually getting out of the sanctions that imposed by United States, and we were not represented on that level. But now this is happening, and I think the international community have a leverage on the government that claiming and always reminding us that human rights and democracy is our basis, and we should build up our system based on that. So I think the importance of involvement of international partners and entities, whether states, whether organizations who believe in the equal rights for all human beings, including LGBTQI+ community, to step in and to push forward, because this is a one-of-a-time opportunity. It doesn't happen that much, and we need to act on it collectively, whether for us as activists on the grounds, or whether for all people who are believing and supporting and advocating for LGBTQI+ rights.
Thank you so much for that. Question to all three of you is, like, if I hear you well, there's lots of friction between ideology versus evidence and the human rights frameworks. It's always the big old thing that comes up in the clash in advancing rights for our communities. I'd love to hear your perspectives on that. And like, there was one question: what can we do about it? What can we do to dismantle the ideology arguments there to advance in the legal and policy framework equality? Maybe Randy first, then Hamada. Well, anyone who wants to respond. But Randy, go ahead.
Sure. Look, it's a very good question, and I have to say that, you know, Canada has made some changes and some advances even with my own lifetime and within my own lifetime, but there's still a lot of work to do. And even in Canada, we have this battle still that plays out among the political parties, and some of it is fueled by religious sentiment, some of it is just fueled by ideology, and some of it's fueled by fear. And so I will know that Canada has advanced in the rest of my lifetime if we get to a point where, regardless of political party, LGBTQ2 people aren't treated like a political football. And I think of what the Netherlands have done, and where, you know, the fact that orange is always part of the rainbow is one of the themes when it comes to recruiting people to the Netherlands. And LGBTQI rights are so entrenched in that country that it doesn't matter whether it's a right government or a left government, LGBT people matter. And we're not there yet in Canada. And so I think what we have to do is we have to cultivate allies, and we have to build champions, and we have to continue to amplify their work. And what I mean by this is, an ally is somebody that has my back when I'm in the room, but a champion is someone that has my back when I'm not in the room. And we simply need more champions. And I think there's a false dichotomy that it's SOGI or faith, and that's not true. We cannot split people into either their sexual or gender identity and their faith identity. We are whole people. And so there's a really good organization here run by Dr. Brent Hawkes in Canada, Rainbow Faith and Freedom, and it's taking on this issue of LGBTQ people within faith communities. And the issue that we have to get to is, let's go to the core of all religions, which is love and respect for the other and causing no violence. And if we can get to the point that we should do no harm to another person, then that is likely the path that we can get to taking the death penalty away, taking the jailing away, and eventually getting to discrimination being removed from all of our societies. It's a long journey, and it's going to require all of us to work together. And no human rights or civil rights movement in the world's history has advanced without allies and champions. And so that is, I think, where our work must lie.
Alexa, unfortunately, I can't see you. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, definitely exactly what Randy has said, especially in terms of allies and champions, and challenging a lot of the false narratives that are permeating societies when it comes to trying to advocate for change and integration, inclusion. One other thing that I also want to call out is this thing where some people tend to use the word ally as a license to kill, for lack of better words. That when you do certain things that are casually homophobic, that you think it's nothing much, and then when the community members have to call you out and say, but no, you're not to do that, you shouldn't do that. And admittedly, some of us will get a bit heated and read you for filth on it. And then there's some people that say, but I'm an ally. It's like, if you're an ally, you'd shut up, listen to us, take the time from us, and be guided. You know, and I always say, it's not just you using the banner, it's also the content of your character and what you do. Just like with friendship, you're not my friend just for my friend. You're my friend because you respect me, you trust me. There's respect, mutual respect, there's mutual trust. And it's not just there when we're in person. If my back is turned, if I'm not even in the room, if I'm not even on the island, if I'm dead, and someone says something that they shouldn't, and you know they shouldn't have said it, be prepared to say, hey, that's not true. You shouldn't have said that. And I'm not going to let you go and say that about that person. And that's what we need when it comes to our allies. We need people who are not just there ready to wave the flag and the banner and walk alongside us in the parades. But even if it is in the workplace and there are people sharing something on Facebook or WhatsApp, you know, publishing malicious stories on social media, be prepared to call that out and say, hey, that's not cool. That's not on. That's completely out of pocket. And that's what we need more of. Because if we have more of this performative allyship, for lack of better words, if we have more of that performative behavior, it's really going to cut us. Because then when the time comes that we have to put our money where our mouths are, people are going to show up bankrupt and tongues dry. You know, so that's something that we really need to sort out. And we also need to have, you know, this may seem like a bit of an unfair demand, but we need to have a little bit more backbone with some of our own community members. Yes, there are moments where you're going to say something that it can, you know, cause some backlash, but there's some moments where you have no other choice but to incur that backlash, because it's either you become the hated person in the room, or, you know, as we say here, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So I would rather be damned for speaking out and calling out a certain issue than to, you know, keep silent and suffer in that silence, and it never gets better. Because if I suffer in silence, that means other people are being set up to suffer. But if I speak now, I give a chance for someone else to not have to go through what I'm.
Thank you so much. Hamada, the last words for you before I close this session. Time flies.
Yeah, exactly. I was just looking at the watch, and I think, yes, listening to everything that had been said, and also just trying to reflecting it on what kind of discussions are being happening, especially with a discussion regarding building alliances and having allies, whether in a personal level or even within the human rights movement or the civil society movement. It's quite interesting how, again, a lot of similarities that are being displayed, which, for example, on the level of having this level of alliances with the civil society movement in general in Sudan, I can point out, and this is a very common discussion that we have within the queer movement, is we can point out an endless amount of individuals who are part of organizations, human rights defending organizations, who are allies on the personal level, but then their bodies, even if they were the executive directors of those bodies, can never outspeakingly prove or even support the ideology or the idea of being an ally or being a supporter or being an entity that recognizes LGBTQI plus rights. And this is a conversation that we constantly having with the civil society. Before the revolution, it was always that the government is already cracking down on civil society, so we don't need to add a more provocative approach. But now it's, again, we hear the very expected discussion of, this is a very busy period. It is a period of change, and we need to set our priorities. And I think, or this is what they say, that they think is, this is not the right time for LGBTQI plus rights. Using the argument of ideology, using the argument of what is the general mood, the national mood. We need to build up our confidence first, and then we move forward. But we believe that this is all a very lousy excuses, and we are not willing to accept it anymore, whether from the government itself, and to some extent, because you cannot keep advertising yourself as a human rights based government, or even from the civil society, or even from international organizations as well, and international entities. This is a time of change, and we need to work on it immediately, not later.
Absolutely, and I really hope to greet you as panelists next year with an update on these stories. For now, a big virtual applause for my fabulous panelists, Hamada, Alexa, and Randy, and Anna Elena, who had to jump off. Thank you so much for being with us for this really great conversation. Wishing all the attendees a beautiful day. Please join us tomorrow again. This was the last session of Out Summit for today, but tomorrow we carry on like this is a 3-day event. So if you want to join us in Bangkok tomorrow, 10 p.m. it will be 4 p.m. in Europe, or it will be 10 a.m. in the US and Canada. So please join us tomorrow again for Day of Out Summit. Thank you all so very much. Have a lovely day. Thank you for attending. Bye-bye.